you guys like that intro. Here we go. The pressure is on. This is a 2004 Nissan 350Z. Comes in for a misfire concern. Interesting car. It had been worked on a little bit. The owner was kind of hands-on. He had put a little cold air intake setup on it. Had a really cool exhaust system on it. It felt like an X-pipe, good sounding muffler, real deep, which was really nice because you could kind of hear the misfire as it would misfire. It would bum 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 bum. I don't know if that's going to come out, but my best impression. So I did a quick scan. Had the dreaded P0300 multi-cylinder misfire. I looked at some fuel trim data. Nothing crazy with the trims. Not a lot of correction, which generally indicates mechanical or ignition. So that's kind of the way I'm focused right now. But the first thing I want to do is I want to figure out what cylinder or cylinders are actually misfiring. So I took my first look sensor and put in the exhaust pipe. If you go back to my first video, I set it up basically like that, used some rags, started this bad dude up and let it idle. And this is a portion of the capture that I got. And what I'm looking for is low pulse areas. So immediately this sticks out. And this is kind of centered between them. I've got a sync on number one, and this is kind of centered. And this one kind of sticks out. And it's not quite centered. So there's my multi-cylinder. So now let's figure out which cylinders are misfiring. Let's zoom in here first. I'm going to lay off 2 crankshaft rotations, which is 720 degrees. I've got a ruler at every 120 because it is a 6-cylinder. So if I'm synced on number one, we go halfway. The pulse to the left would be number one. Now you can actually move these a little because we know we get the spark happens a little before top dead center, so you can kind of delay these a little. And there's a little bit of latency in the exhaust because of the volume. So I'm going to start looking for number one a little bit. Right there, and it's kind of creeping into here too. So number one's on my radar. So let's back up. Let's look at this cylinder here. Just basically move everything over. I got lucky and caught both misfires on the same screen. Doesn't happen like that all the time. So we go back to our center. So if this is number one, this would be number two. And that would fill in the blanks for my multi-cylinder. So right now I want to look at number one and number two. Both are the front cylinders on both banks on this motor. And so without disturbing, messing around with the coils too much right now, I want to kind of work around the edges, so to speak. I don't want to get too intrusive and accidentally fix the car, with a bad connection at a coil or something like that. So the next capture I'm going to show, I have a first look sensor in the exhaust, just like this. I'm going to put one in the intake, and I'm going to give you a sync on number one. I also had a relative compression check set up. The battery was dead in my clamp. I don't know. I did recheck it later, and it wasn't a lot to be seen, so I'm not going to really go over the relative compression because, as we'll see later in the video, there is compression loss. It just didn't quite show up as defined on the relative because, after all, it is relative. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the next screen where I'm doing a breathing test, and we'll go over that. Basically what I've got going on here is the green trace is the first look sensor in the exhaust pipe, the same spot that it was with the prior test. The red trace here is a pulse look sensor in the intake, so I can look at intake pulses. And of course, our sync here is on number 1. I forgot to mention our firing order for this engine is very difficult. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Forgot to mention that, so it's kind of important. Looking across, we can zoom in on the exhaust pulse, but I can tell you there's really nothing to be seen. The exhaust pulse is pretty uniform. I mean, nothing's really sticking out. I didn't analyze each and every little, bump and peak and valley, and you would go cross-eyed or pull your hair out, but nothing really sticks out to me with that. Then I do the same thing with the intake pulse. We'll just take a little bite here and we'll look. Something I do like to do is I like to pull a line down. And when you pull a line down, it kind of starts making things show up. So I look across, let's just bite in here again. I look across, and I start to see this. First couple engine cycles, everything's fine. Then I start to see this. So the second hump after the ignition sync is coming up a little short. And I like to see it over and over. There it is again. And we know that valves turn as engine spins over or cranks. Now what I've done here is I've disabled the fuel pump. This engine's cranking, not starting, but I don't like to do this test with the throttle blade open. This engine does have the capability of doing a flood mode, but when you do that, it opens the throttle blade, which kills your vacuum. I personally like to do these tests. I kill the fuel, pull the fuel pump fuse, do whatever it takes to stop it from running. I want to keep my spark so I have my sync, but I like my throttle blade closed. It keeps this very neat and clean. If you open the throttle blade, this immediately becomes really mushy. A lot of stuff going on. I would advise anybody to try it and see for yourself. This is just the way I do it. See, it's short again. It's the second one after the spark event. Second one after the spark event. So now I'm starting to see something that piques my interest. There it is again. Now the question is, which cylinder is that? So let's find out. Let's find one right there. So let's pull our cursors back out, and we'll begin to check this out. So we're going to get our rulers, and we're going to put 6 of them out. I'm synced on number 1, so we're going to go halfway. Now this is an intake pulse. Remember, the exhaust pulse, number 1's would have been to the left. Number 1's going to be to the right on the intake. So if this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4, and this is 5. So let's think about this. Number 2 is misfiring, but number 5 is showing kind of a lower pull or a difference in the pull. Well, if we think about the firing order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, well, 2 and 5 are companion cylinders, meaning they both go up at the same time and they both come down at the same time. One's on compression going up, one's on exhaust going up, one's on power going down, one's on intake going down. It's kind of important to remember that. So I'm going to put up another screen. I'm not going to be able to move it around, but it's going to have a overlay. For some reason, this app that I use, I can't put an overlay on this screen live. It just doesn't show up. So I've got a screenshot that I have an overlay that I'm going to get more into the companion cylinder situation, so we can start breaking this down. So up to this point, we have a misfire on number 1, and we have a misfire on number 2. Well, I can tell you the misfire on number 1 was a cracked spark plug. I wouldn't be doing this video and going this deep over a cracked spark plug. Number 2 is a little more going on. That's what we're exploring. So let's just take 1 out of the picture. 1 is pretty basic. So we're focused on number 2 misfiring, but we have a low pull on number 5, and we do know they are companion cylinders, which is very, very important. So I'm going to put up a screen. It's a screenshot of basically this, and we're going to go over some of the companion cylinder explanation and see if we can make sense of it. Section out of the waveform we just looked at. Like I said, this is a screenshot. Y'all see down here at the time, 5:44 a.m. this morning. I've been up early working on this for you guys. Just kidding. Thanks for tuning in. So here's our waveform. Here's our overlay. There's our firing order. We are synced on number 1, and I don't have this exactly centered. Like I said, it was 5:44. Probably still had sleeps in my eyes, who knows. But it's going to demonstrate what we want to see. So we decided this lower pull was on number 5, and we see right here number 5's intake. So why is that? We're suspecting 2. Well, here's 2. 2 is going up on compression, as we see in the yellow. 5 is going up on exhaust. Roughly right in here is top dead center. We know overlap happens right about top dead center. So if 2 is pushing up and bleeds or leaks a little of its volume into the intake, that essentially would raise the vacuum in the intake. So when number 5 opens, the differential within number 5's cylinder and what's in the intake is closer. So that means the air doesn't rush in as fast. There's got to be a simpler way to explain this. But let's say, for instance, on everybody else's pull, let's just say there's 20 inches of vacuum in the intake, and there's atmosphere on the top of the piston. Except for number 5. Let's say number 5 only has 18 inches of vacuum in the intake, and it has atmosphere on top of the piston. Does that make sense? The air doesn't rush in as fast. Like I said, these pulls do not represent volume. This is a pulse sensor. All it knows is it's up here, a valve opens, it jumps down. A valve opens, it jumps down. A valve opens, it jumps down. Well, when number 5 valve opened, it jumped down. It just didn't jump as far. It didn't have the energy behind it. So I hope that's not too confusing. I will have a video, and we're going to go over, I put a WPS in-cylinder pressure transducer in both of these cylinders, and I'm going to go over that to kind of help concrete this in a little bit. I would never hang a diagnosis on just this. This is simply pointing me down the road that I want to look at. It's direction. Right now I'm thinking I've got an intake valve leaking. I've got an intake valve leaking on number 2. It's pushing pressure, hence volume, back into the intake manifold, which is hurting number 5's pull. That's kind of the way I'm deciphering this. And we're going to go over the in-cylinder on both of these cylinders that will definitely nail this thought down. So at this point, I've yet to pull anything really loose on the engine. And yet I've got a pretty good direction. I'm going mechanical. So we're going in cylinder next, and actually the point, this is the point where I'm going to start taking spark plugs out and examining things. And this is where I actually, right after this is where I actually found the problem of number 1, which was a cracked spark plug. I ended up putting a new plug in it, starting it, redoing some of these tests, which I'm not going to go over it all again. My misfire went away on 1, stayed on 2, which puts us right back to this point right here. And so number 2, we're thinking mechanical. I went in cylinder on 2 and 5, and that really will tell the tale. So there again, number 2's pushing air into the intake, which is diluting or lowering or raising the vacuum, excuse me, and it's hurting number 5's pull. So let's move on to the WPS captures and check those bad dudes out. We are cranking, and we're looking in cylinder on number 2. This is the cylinder that I suspect has an issue. Like I said, this capture is cranking. So the first thing I like to do is look at peak compression. Until we drop a cursor down. We are, let's see, roughly 142.8. So let's take a quick peek at number 5, peak compression. This is a reference waveform I made because I'm going to overlay them in a minute, and we'll look at the differences in the vacuum pulls. But here's number 5's peak compression. Looks like number 5 it kind of levels off around 175. So cylinder 2 was 143, and cylinder 5 is 175. So we're 30 pounds light. I got a feeling it was probably blowing the spark out, because 145 should be enough to fire the cylinder. I did have a Subaru one time with 180, and it had a valve leak, and a good cylinder was over 230. So I don't know if it's just pushing the hydrocarbon out and it's not enough to light the flame, or if it's blowing the flame out on the plug. Not sure, but you would think 145 would be enough to spark, but it sure wasn't. So now, like I said, the black trace is number 5, which I made. It's a reference waveform. Get back down here to the bottom, and then if I turn on, let's see, B, this will be number 2, which, and if we lay it on top of each other, right around in here, zoom in, so you can kind of see they kind of match up pretty good. But you see number 5's pull here. It's the black trace from roughly around when the valve opens. it just doesn't quite, the valve opens here. The piston really isn't moving much, so this drop you see is simply the pressure difference between the top of the piston with an open valve and the intake vacuum, and it's pulling back. Well, you can see that number 2, although 2 has a compression issue, 2's intake pull is fine. Number 5 is the valve, is the cylinder that's suffering. Now it still has volume in it because it's making 175 pounds of pressure. It just doesn't have the push because 2 has diluted the intake. That's the way I'm reading into this. Pretty cool. It's not a big difference, but it's enough. This cylinder was misfiring, and I'm going to put a video at the very end. And in the video, I had removed the intake. And what you'll see is the camera's focused on the 2 intake valves, and I've sprayed a little bit of oil, not motor oil, like Croil, on the valves, and I'm taking a ratchet, and all I'm doing is pulling the crank pulley and bringing the piston up on top dead center, and you'll distinctly see the leak on the intake valve. It is slight, but I ended up pulling the head off of this motor, relapping a new valve in it, putting it back together, and it was fine. So the cracked spark plug fix number 1, lapping in a new, well, I put 2 new valves in it, but only one of them was leaking, and shipped this bad dude down the road. But it is slight. If I had this to do over, if I could turn back time and redo and change my strategy a little bit, I would have taken an absolute sensor or used my WPS, and I would have done a cranking and a running with the absolute pressure on the intake manifold. That way I could have got a little bit more. I mean, the pulse sensors work great. They got me this far, but I'd have liked to have actually seen numbers. But kind of in the heat of battle, I knew I wanted to do a case study on this car, especially once I started finding more and more. So I was taking a lot of extra time, doing a lot of extra captures and this and that, and putting things together, and still trying to get the car fixed in a reasonable amount of time and make money. That's the whole point of it, I guess. But like I said, there, the black trace is number 5, which we saw in the pulse sensor being lower than the rest. And the red trace is number 2. And this is the intake. Right around in here is when the intake valves open, and that's their drop. And that's got to be it. I mean, I see no other discrepancies in it. Kind of cool. I know the repair, putting the valve in it fixed it, but like I said, I should have done a running capture in both cylinders, and I should have used an absolute pressure sensor in both cylinders, or in the intake, and I think that would have completed the picture a little more. It's pretty complete now, but if hindsight's always 20/20, so if I ever get another one of these dealios in, I will definitely do that. And the cars I've ran in, this was an older, I did this is an old capture. It's several years ago. I've since changed my strategies a little bit, but I still think it was worthy of posting. I learned a lot. I think a few people have learned a lot, and hope you guys enjoyed. It's been a little bit of work putting it together, but it's not a big deal. But yeah, 175 and 143. So 32 pounds of pressure difference created a misfire in this cylinder. And like I said, tune in for the little video. It's like 12 seconds. There's no audio, but you'll see the valves leaking. So hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, share, all the good stuff. Comment if you've seen something like this before. If you have a different method of checking things, hell, I'm open for all discussions. But it's around the 23rd of December, so Merry Christmas to everybody. And I hope Santa Claus brings you all picoscopes and stuff. Take it easy.